Hello, everybody, and welcome back to this Leadership Summit on AI and machine learning in talent acquisition. Our next session is going to be a conversation about conversational AI and probably some other cool stuff. And to have that conversation, we have two wonderful thought leaders in our field. The first is Josh Swyan, who is the Chief Marketing Officer at Paradox.ai. And Josh, please accept our thanks for your sponsorship of this event. We're very grateful for that. And Christina Coyle, who is the head of talent acquisition North America for ISS Facility Services North America. Welcome. The floor is all yours.
Thank you, Peter. I appreciate it. Christina, good to see you. It's been a while. I think, Christina, we have to check your audio. I can't hear your audio right now for some reason. Let's try that. Can we hear you now? Test. Still can't hear you. We thought, I think you're on mute was like the saying of 2020. I think it's going to carry over to 2021. All right, so maybe while Christina checks out the audio, I can give a quick bio or kind of intro to who I am and my background a little bit, and then set up Christina to talk about herself and her background. She's the more interesting person here anyway. So I am the Chief Marketing Officer at a company called Paradox. Obviously, we are supporting Peter in this event here. We've had a long-standing relationship with him. And I lead kind of brand marketing and demand generation and thought leadership around all things conversational AI and automation in recruiting. I've been at for about 5 years, worked previously with a company called Smashfly and was the head of marketing over there. Really developed thought leadership around this concept of recruitment marketing and a recruiting CRM within recruitment, and have since moved over to Paradox and championing the conversational AI and its role in creating better experiences both for candidates and recruiters. I'll wait till Christina can jump on. I'll give her bio quickly. I don't even know where to start, and I won't do justice, but Christina is an absolute star in our industry. She's a soft-spoken who doesn't really talk about herself and her accounts all that often, but hopefully we get a chance to dive into those today. Christina was formerly with McDonald's, and I'm not even going to try and guess at her title, but has deep experience in high volume hourly hiring in particular, but really in recruitment in general at the enterprise level. And she's now the head of recruiting and talent acquisition over at ISS, which if you don't know, and you probably aren't terribly aware, is a pretty massive employer globally. Again, working primarily with high volume hourly. And excited to have Christina here. So it sounds like we're gonna, Peter or somebody on the TA Tech team side, or are we waiting on Christina to figure out the audio?
Yes, we are trying to get her to call in, see if we can get her audio that way. So do we have her?
Looks like we got her back. Just Christina, maybe try unmuting on your phone, maybe. There we go. Got it.
Success? Okay. Wow. I thought 2020 was over, but no, we're still creeping in.
We're never going to escape it, Christina. Let's be real.
Yeah. Well, I think it's the going between Microsoft Teams to WebEx to Zoom all in one day with your equipment, maybe. But great to see you. Great to be here.
Yeah, same. So I gave you a very kind of weak introduction, I think, considering your credentials and your history. So I'll tee it back up to you if you want to walk through kind of your history in the space and your role at ISS.
Well, you're usually very gracious with me. But yeah, I've been doing recruiting before it was talent acquisition, and even before Monster existed. I hate to say that because you might do math and figure out my age range. But I started in agency recruiting, fell into corporate talent acquisition, had both recruiter roles and leadership roles at AT&T in the high volume field-based retail space. Then I did a foray into RPO, so recruitment process outsourcing. And I found that when you have to not only do excellent work in delivering talent, but you need to do it with a profit margin, that takes it to a whole nother level. So I learned a lot of great best bets there. And as technology came into the space, realized that with technology and smart technology, that's how you can scale, that's how you can deliver, and also manage cost. My last client in the RPO space was Walmart. We stood that up. They were a first-time buyer of RPO, and with Walmart, you can imagine that took scale to a whole other level until I got to McDonald's, and that's where I got to know Josh and the Paradox team. And at McDonald's, I was responsible for the U.S. restaurants, workforce planning, and talent attraction. And now I'm with ISS, head of TAs for North America. And this too has been fantastic work as well.
That's awesome. I think we're going to get into your accomplishments with McDonald's and kind of the transformation process that you led there, and I'm sure probably your vision at ISS as well, and kind of where things are moving for you in that direction. I'm curious, just kind of, I always like doing where are we coming from and where are we going? I think it provides context on some of the changes and transformation that we've seen or are starting to see. But let's talk about hourly hiring in general. My wife is also a former recruiter. She now works in talent acquisition for General Motors. I think there's this notion that somehow hourly hiring is simpler, it's easier, it's transactional, it's butts and seats, and you just got to churn and burn and get people through the door. In reality, as you know, it's so much harder than that, and so much more difficult. And so talk a little bit about kind of how high volume hourly has evolved over the years, what you've seen in your different roles, where you kind of expect it to go. And we'll get into kind of how technology came into the picture for you and how you started thinking about it as something that could be transformational.
Sure. Well, I'm obsessed with hourly recruitment. And while I've been able to work across industries and across levels, hourly is my passion. And I think that's where you can really impact an organization, impact a field-based organization. And when you figure something out to shave off a little time here or there or improve experience, the volume, the magnitude of that change is really powerful. Absolutely. And, we might be hand-holding some executive recruitment roles, but the thousands of hires that are made every year in field are absolutely critical. And I think that now more than ever, we need to really think about, how do we flip on a switch on and off technology?
Yeah, for sure. And to your point, I think like just shaving a percentage point of efficiency or saving a percentage point of cost for McDonald's, right? Like when you have a 99-cent cheeseburger, saving a penny or two is pretty massive. And those costs, people costs in particular are a huge part of any company's budget, whether you're a small franchisee who owns a couple of restaurants or you're McDonald's corporate. So walk me through, I guess, when you started looking through transformation at Walmart, or when you start a transformation project in general, what are some of the things that you think about or consider? And how is hourly hiring unique or kind of different than professional kind of salaried staffing experience hires on the corporate level? That's more my wife's strong suit and kind of what she's familiar with. But I think there tends to be this confusion that there's a lack of sophistication in hourly hiring, and I actually think it's completely different. You have to be extremely operationally sophisticated, and the types of technology that can be used that are helping that field are really, really interesting. In some ways, I think some of our hourly clients are pushing the needle from a technology standpoint more so than some others. I'm just kind of curious to hear you talk through those kind of perspectives.
Sure. With hourly hiring, I think there's greater complexity, even though you might think, oh, well, what are the minimum qualifications, or anyone could do that job, or almost anyone can do that job.
Right.
One, the importance of experience and engagement in order to differentiate yourself, but it's really speed to everything, speed to paycheck for the candidate, but that means speed to hire, and ultimately that's speed to initial response or speed to interview. And oftentimes, you know, the best candidates go first. You might experience, well, that's where there's no margin for error then in the hourly space. Interestingly, too, a lot of frontline roles are recruiter-less to begin with. So if you're looking at, you know, a restaurant, a QSR, the great likelihood is that there is no recruiter. There may or may not be someone who's the people person even, you know, or it might be limited to do higher paperwork. So it becomes the impact and the cost savings of giving that time back to the hiring manager. So and that cycle of you're shorthanded, so you're having to do the work yourself, but then you know that you should be checking email, or you know you should be trying to post for a position or interview a candidate, and you know that you really need to make sure that you coach and train the folks that you do have so you don't lose them, but you literally can't do all things at one time. And it's magnified too when you're in a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week type of business. For me, when I'm looking at transformation, or I'm looking at, you know, what are opportunities to optimize, to reduce spend, to reduce time, increase experience. For me, it's really dissecting that one hire. You know, we think of that as like, oh, that's a transaction, or that's one hire. That one hire is probably 20-ish different transactions that can be graded around experience and also get like a time date stamp to it. And it's looking at all of those things together. So, you know, a few seconds here, a couple hours here, 5 days here, you add all that together, and it's really very powerful to look at.
So experience, I think it's really interesting when we think about hourly, that this concept of candidate experience, and I've dealt with this throughout my career at Smashfly. Like a big part of our messaging was around, if you deliver better experiences, you attract better people, you create, you know, habits. You know, that sense of experience, I think, tends to really cement itself in salaried professional hiring. And it gets ignored on the hourly side, because again, you're focused more on process efficiency and process automation. And you know, the ATS, you know, came along and solved the problem of paper applications, but it didn't necessarily solve the experience. So does experience matter in hourly hire? I know the answer to this, and I have my own opinions, but like, does experience,
Yeah.
like when we talk about candidate experience, what does that mean in the hourly world, and how important is it? Actually, because I think, again, people tend to, when they think about experience, they think about that software engineer that's being recruited by 12 different companies, and you better make sure that person is has a white glove experience, because if you don't, then you're not going to compete. But what does it mean at the hourly level?
Well, I think it's almost more powerful, again, because a lot of companies don't do it well. So it's even that much more of a dramatic differentiator. In particular, if you're in a service industry of any sort, you've got to role model that which you expect from people. So if it's hospitality, if it's service, if it is having a high attention to detail, whatever that might be really core to your industry or what that role involves, how do you not provide that and then expect to get it in turn? So I think it's very powerful in that way. And I know at McDonald's, we were very focused on that hospitality component. And so we wanted to make sure that we demonstrated hospitality, and that we smiled, that we smiled with an emoji, that we asked if we could be, of additional assistance, and so on. So I think that's one key core piece. And the other is when there is competition, and there will be, more and more of that, again, it becomes all the more critical of, you know what, I really enjoyed that process, or I got to know that company and, the brand and the culture throughout the process. And if I have to drive 5 extra minutes compared to another offer, or if I might make 10, 20 cents less with that other offer, I choose the company that I feel like I've had a better experience with.
Yeah, for sure. So you talked about having like a smiling face. I think I've talked about this with Jacob Kramer, who's the head of recruiting for US Express, and in their world, it's all trucking and truck drivers, right? So within that segment of workers, they don't trust technology. They don't trust automation. They're a little bit worried that eventually technology is gonna steal their job and these trucks are gonna drive themselves, right? So there's this distrust of technology and like process automation that you have to overcome if you're going to have technology take over some part of the process. Because if a truck driver feels like they're talking to a robot, or that a robot's making decisions about their employment, then it's almost a deal breaker, like that they'd walk away. So it becomes like really important that you humanize that experience a little bit. It's also, Paradox has humanized our assistant with Olivia, and you guys kind of customize that at McDonald's to even feel more on brand. But talk about any kind of feedback you got from hiring managers or store managers, from candidates themselves, maybe, that kind of indicated that this stuff actually matters, and that people do appreciate the fact that even if they know it's not an actual human, that it feels human, and what, why that matters, if it matters at all.
Well, yeah. So one, when you think about Olivia or her other personas that exist, her other names, depending upon the client or the solution, so much more than a chat. It's not a chatbot. Like there is that, of course, the machine learning, the natural language processing, et cetera. But like, she learns your brand. She learns what matters, and you can hold a conversation. We did a lot of testing and training in order to ensure that was the case. What I think is the most telling result is people would know, candidates would know, I'm talking to an assistant, a virtual assistant. Hiring managers would know. But you know what? They would still reply back, thanks, thank you, or you're awesome, or smiley face. Like, they were still engaging. And I remember some of the verbatims during tests. We even had candidates say, like, some gushing about the experience and appreciation. And then, I don't even know why I'm saying this, because I know you're not a person. Yeah. So I think that there's a certain degree of the good kind of contagion when people see like the thank yous, or the how else can I assist you, or my pleasure. It really it sets the tone, and it changes, I think, everyone's behavior for the better.
Yeah, I think I always go back to, and I hate to say this, although you're now not at McDonald's, but one of my favorite restaurants is Chick-fil-A. I love Chick-fil-A. But it's the importance of language. I know, cover your ears. I love McDonald's too, for the record. But like the importance of words and language, it does matter. And Chick-fil-A is famous for anytime they help you, they say my pleasure, and that's become part of their culture. It's part of who they are. And it's such a subtle thing, but you walk away from that feeling like they actually wanted to help me. Like they were there to make sure that I had all my questions answered, or I had a great experience. And it's just 2 little words. So, it kind of goes back to, I think what you guys did really, really well at McDonald's is it felt like Olivia was an employee of McDonald's. And it was this person who was there to make sure that your questions were answered, and that, even if you didn't get the job, you felt like you were considered fairly for it. You didn't have to wait around 10 days to get to hear back from a recruiter. You were put through the process in a way that was respectful and fair and transparent. And I think that, that just I think transforms the experience completely. You guys did a really good job of making it your own, which always fascinated me. But I guess that leads to my question, which is, of all the things that can be automated in the hiring process, what parts of it have you found are the most effective or have the biggest impact on the business, either operationally or financially or from an experiential perspective? There's so much opportunity to automate everything. And the question is, what should we automate versus what should humans still do? So what parts of it have you found are kind of, what's the right balance, right, the right mix of what should technology do versus what should humans still handle?
Well, humans, I think, will always be necessary. It will be more of our highest and best use. So I think when looking at a solution or when assessing current state, really ask yourself, what's the highest and best use of the hiring manager, of the recruiter? Is it to schedule? Is it to make phone calls and leave messages? Or is it to coach and advise and do talent planning with the hiring manager? I mean, I think you know the answer, to that. But it's really dependent, I think, on the organization, its pain points, and its overall process. We know that scheduling, the power of scheduling, is huge. The power of being able to screen and to really automate solid decision rules, very, very powerful. And in fact, the consistency in candidate experience and in hire is so powerful because you're removing that element of human error from the mix. If you're seeking to really change your persona or your brand or influence the not even the candidate experience, but more of the outcome of hire, that's where the nuance and the intentionality of brand voice, of elevating brand voice, of being anticipatory is really, really powerful. And additionally, what we found at McDonald's is that as we built these things and used these core building blocks of scheduling support, of screening, et cetera, and we got feedback, we got recommendations from hiring teams about, can Olivia do this? Or, I mean, I joke that, Olivia and the ice cream machines, is something that is not within recruitment scope, but would not surprise me if she got involved in that space. So it's really that speed to paycheck and the prompting, the reminding, the checking in, the engaging. And I would also say to make sure those hires stick after first week, to be able to just check in.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think as a marketer, I think the tendency for marketers is you think about top of funnel lead generation. So our job is to get everybody interested in what we do, and then we throw it over to sales, and then sales sells the deal, and then they walk away and they pass it off to client success. I think it's such a broken way to think about it, because then it's so compartmentalized and so segmented, and the experience can be completely different for the client or the buyer. And I think it's the same is true in recruiting, where your first call with a recruiter could be great, but then if the recruiter doesn't communicate to the hiring manager and they didn't prep the hiring manager correctly, or the hiring manager didn't do enough research on the candidate, then that experience can stink. But let's say even that experience is good. Great, I accept the offer. And now I go into onboarding, and the onboarding experience stinks. And if that stinks, well then, my first day as an employee, all of a sudden my whole excitement, my perception around this opportunity is completely jaded by one part of the experience that frankly should have continued throughout the entire life cycle. But I could not agree more there. So I want to transition to, it's funny because I think as you talk about how the hiring managers would be like, oh yes, and like, this is great, what if we could do this? That requires a certain degree of buy-in from everybody involved. So you work for this massive company with all these different stakeholders, all the way from probably the head of HR down to your franchise owners to the actual store managers working in the restaurants. How the heck did you manage that? what tips do you have around kind of change management and transformation from that point? I know you guys at McDonald's took a really interesting approach, and you've managed massive transformation projects at different points in your career. So how do you do that and get everybody bought into the idea first so that everybody's excited about it? And then how do you continue to push your partners and the vendors you work with to continue to innovate and build with you as you go? Because there's while it's nice to buy a solution off the shelf, for companies as big as the ones you've worked for, it's rare that you can take that and just plug it in. There's a bit of partnership that goes back and forth. So it's a big question, but like, how the heck does somebody start even thinking about this, and then how do they manage the process as they go?
There's a lot there. I think one, while it was a transformation, you could look at it as also an HRIS, ATS type of initiative, but really it was more than that. It was a movement. I mean, when I think about McHire was a movement. It wasn't I have to, it was an I get to. And that's what was cool, is that the build involved everyone, and it was I think the intentionality up front to stakeholder. And, being an organization that was largely franchised, you don't get to deploy things. You can deploy, a chicken sandwich to compete with Josh's favorite, but you can't necessarily, deploy a human capital solution. And so we had skin in the game to ensure that we were intentional with not only building something that was fantastic, but getting the voice of the customer, the voice of stakeholders, not only having those listening sessions, but doing something with the listening session to be able to show that did make it in, and that changed what we had as a result. We initially looked at just a front end, type of solution to get to final candidate.
Yeah.
And it grew in a matter of months to collecting shoe size, because that was a thing and that was a time saver, to parsing data in to get sign-ons, and then even WOTC credits. The impact around really any dimension, be it speed, experience, or cost savings, far exceeded anyone's expectations. So I think the same rigor that a lot of organizations have around like a PMO or an enterprise-wide PMO, a people PMO, I think you need that same degree of rigor and planning and, frankly, resourcing in order to deliver on change management. I really see CMO of the future being change management officer. Yeah. And similarly, what I saw, that thread that goes all the way through, and using the example of marketing to sales to then client success.
Yeah.
This has the ability to really be a whole employee engagement, talent management component as well. When you look at the surveys that we did around experience, to think about that, how was your first week? And really, we were not only saying we hope you had a great first week, but we were also wanting to make sure that you met the manager, that you had, certain expectations of training met, and then if not, we could course correct.
Yeah, I think one of the things that fascinated me about your process too is you didn't force change down people's throats. Like, you sat down with all the different stakeholders and you said, here's what we're doing, here's how we're thinking about it, but like, how is this going to work in your world? Tell me about your world. Help me understand the way that this technology could be used or will be used. And then taking that feedback and bringing it back to your vendor and saying, I know it works this way today, but could we do this, and push back on the vendor a little bit? I think, I'm curious to get your perspective, because you've been in this industry for a while. So you've seen these different kind of phases of technology grow. So like, I think there's a portion of people that think about technology as like an ATS does X, and it can't do anything beyond that because it just does X. And my career site does Y because it's a career site and it only fits that purpose. more
Mhm.
modern technology is so much more flexible, and that in the way that it's built and the way that it's architected, and especially when you work with startups like Paradox, it's like I think
Mhm.
there's just more flexibility to push back on the vendor and say like, I know you built it this way. What if we did it this way, and see what the answer
Mhm.
is. There might be times where,
Mhm.
and I'm sure you ran into this with Aaron occasionally. The answer is no. Like it's we there are limits to what we can do, and we just can't like create anything. But I think
Are
that
there?
like
I don't know.
yeah, maybe not. Um, but it seemed like there was just this really collaborative relationship all the way up and down the chain, where it was from the store manager really understanding what their pain points were and what they were struggling with, all the way to the vendor to say,
Mhm.
what can we do? What is possible? And
Mhm.
considering all those different perspectives allowed you to not only create a solution that worked for everybody, but communicate it out in a way that got everybody really excited, which, you know, I was in awe of personally. It's hard enough to drive change management in a 200-person organization. For you to do it the way that you did at McDonald's was pretty fascinating. So no question
Yeah, it
there,
was.
but just more like reflection, I guess.
Yeah, no, that it really was remarkable. I will say that I don't think I ever heard the word no from Aaron or team. Um, we had great candid dialogue around just, okay, what would be involved to do this? Or what are you, everything was a use case, you know, what are you trying to achieve? So I think that because we dialogue around what we're trying to achieve and what we want with experience, I can't write code. I can't design, you know,
I can't either.
the technology for a process. So by sharing and translating back and forth, that's we were able to do those things. And I would say that when I led with oh, let's just do this, or I'd like to do this, I saw early on that whatever after that investment of time of this is what I'm trying to achieve, or this is why, what came back to me far exceeded what there were limits on what I thought was possible. And those limits now have just been blown completely, because there are no limits when you have a movement, when you have people partnering and sharing. I think when I think about one of the first remarks that you made about the how, oftentimes we design solutions based on what we think. And so being somebody who's been in recruiting or led teams, I'm going to think through the recruiter's lens, or I'm going to think about what metrics I want that I need to have or ease to pull a report. But if we pause and really think about our end users, hiring manager and candidate both, it's interesting because, you know, many of us go through these exercises with consultants, or when you're doing a transformation, where you do like, okay, design thinking and a persona, you know, and I'm applicant so-and-so, or this is what I want to do. And while there's plenty of value that comes from writing on sticky note, putting it on a wall, you know, all those exercises to get people thinking that way, for me, it was more of the ethnographic approach. Like I went into restaurants, and I remember I had heard a lot in my first 30 days about process opportunities. But when I went there and I sat in the office and I heard the ding, 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 ding of drive-through and everything else, and then I saw what the hiring manager was doing, that experience was critical. Sitting down and talking with a small business owner, that was so powerful to hear. So I think it's really about that. Let's not look through our lens, and let's challenge ourselves to think there is no one size fits all for talent. So if I buy compensation benchmark data, I might want to buy it for executive or corporate in one place, but somebody else for frontline. And I think forcing ourselves into like one recruitment process or one technology suite, it's solve your problem, solve the use case, and look at it separately.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I love that you went and sat in the restaurant, because it's, I think since starting with Paradox and really knowing how we're working with these different kind of personas or these different groups, it changes your lens on everything. Like I remember walking through the grocery store and I was wearing my Paradox jacket, and I live in Michigan. Paradox I'm the only employee in Michigan, or one of 2 employees. So it's not like Paradox is a known brand in Michigan. But this woman walked up to me in the grocery store and she said, "Hey, do you work for Olivia?" And I was like, "I don't work for Olivia,
I
but
do.
I guess I technically do." And she's like, I need to tell you, she worked for this restaurant called Olga's in Michigan, and this big franchise group had bought Paradox. So one of their restaurants was Olga's. And she's like, I'm a restaurant manager. I used to go home at night and I would look through all the applications. I would schedule interviews manually. I would try and answer questions about next steps for candidates. And I would do that from 9 to 11 p.m. because I had to put my kids to bed. We had dinner with the family, and I don't have time during the day to do all this stuff. And she's like, I can't tell you how much it's changed my life that I don't have to do that anymore, and that work is kind of taken care of. And when you hear like from that perspective, you really start to see the impact that the technology can have. A lot of times you focus on metrics and percentage changes and dollars saved and all that stuff. When you hear somebody say like, you gave me 3 hours back in my day and it's allowed me to change my career or change my life, like that's the stuff where when you hear it, you're like, okay, we're actually making an impact. This category of technology can make an impact. And so it just changes the lens around. There's a lot of hype around AI. People don't necessarily know what it is. When you say conversational AI, you think chatbot, and that's something you just throw on the career site. It answers questions, but there's a lot more depth to it. And I think that depth starts with exactly what you said, starting with that question of what solution are we trying to solve for? What are the pain points that we're trying to solve for, and how are we going to do it? And then it opens the field. Like then you can say like, all right, there's all these different categories of technology. Which ones make sense for this particular use case or this particular problem? But it's a perspective shift, as opposed to saying, I have this category of technology in this bucket, and it's going to address this problem, and you compartmentalize or kind of restrict yourself from solutions that might make a lot more sense.
Yeah, and I don't see it as products either. I really do see it as that pliability to be able to design workflows.
Yeah, totally. So on that note, I think we've got a few minutes left here. When you think about the future of, people say, the future of work gets thrown around a lot. I think that's a nice little buzzword. But as you're starting to think through, particularly in your new role now, how technology is going to impact how you work, how your recruiters work, how your field managers work, what sorts of technologies are you thinking about? How is it different than maybe the problems you were tackling at McDonald's? And does it require you to kind of approach things completely differently? And where does kind of AI in general fit into that mix?
Well, a lot of what we hire for is field-based, and it's hourly, and it's frontline, and it's recruiterless. And so those same tenets, they remain. There's also the opportunity, though, to really differentiate and to set that bar and to convey brand for corporate hiring as well, to include at the executive level. So I think there's again that looking through the lens. I'm seeking now to really be a student of the business, and I look forward to the point where I can rattle something off that has nothing to do with talent per se, but that shows that I know the business and the need. But I think the ability to be fast, to be service oriented, and to just really look at, I think, democratizing some of the best bets in talent management. So oftentimes we think about, succession planning, talent review, internal mobility, rotational assignments. My goal is to distill that and to bring that to the frontliners. Like we should know who our next, restaurant lead is, or we should know who our next cafe manager is, our janitorial supervisor. And we should help facilitate that internal mobility, because sometimes I think people leave companies, but they're really leaving a shift, or they're leaving a commute time or a supervisor. So I want to get more dialogue that way.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting how much similarity there is probably between your last two positions, but then also you have to completely relearn everything because the business language is different, the way the business is set up, the structure is different. You know, bringing up kind of employee development and career pathing and mobility. Not that that didn't matter at McDonald's, but I know McDonald's talked about how it was America's best first job, or I can't remember the tagline exactly. But in a lot of ways, it's like there's an acknowledgement at McDonald's that, you know, this is somebody's first job. They are going to move out of the business eventually, and that's okay. Like you kind of want to create this foundation for them. Other companies, the goal is to keep as many people as you can and just develop them up. That you have a bit of a kind of a ladder to the top, if you will. But it is fascinating how you have to, like, it can seem from the outside like two analogous, very similar positions and challenges. And there are little kind of things that make it unique and different. You have to approach it knowing what you know from your previous experience, but then also not letting that shape or shift too much how you approach the new problem.
Absolutely. And one gift from the time working at McDonald's was that I couldn't just think, oh, I'm going to deploy this because we're here and we're people and we're TA, so we're deploying. And so I never want to take a deployed mindset. So that taught me to really change manage in a far more intense, personal, and real way. And I think that all of us in corporate roles should still keep that thinking.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. All right. I think we're up against time here, Peter. I don't know if there are questions for us to kind of handle here or anything from the audience.
We did have one question come in, JZ. How do you envision facilitating training in the context of workers who are hired hourly and have to jump to different gigs?
That's a good question. I'm going to let Christina tackle that one. Really. That's not for me. Yeah.
Wow. Thanks, Josh. That is a great question. And I think snack size is the future. And what I found with the journey and how we can use, conversational AI is things can be snack size. So it can be just a bit. We go through the screening or the scheduling on my timeline, or it could be we do everything right away and within a half an hour we're done. So I think training becoming more snack size and up to the end user to decide, okay, do I have 15 minutes to invest or do I have 2 hours to invest? I think that's going to be critical. That's scalable and consistent, yet still bespoke. And that's the power of what we're talking about today with AI.
Definitely. I got nothing to add there. I mean, Christina's the real expert source. Peter, is anything else?
No, Josh, I think that is it. You guys, this was a great conversation. Many, many thanks for that. If folks have follow-up questions that they'd like to get to you, what's the best way to contact each of you?
Christina, you go first.
Sure. Email is great. It's Christina, CHRISTINA .Coyle, COYLE at us.issworld.com, or happy to connect on LinkedIn too.
Same for me. LinkedIn is great. Occasionally on Twitter, although I've tried to stay away from Twitter a little bit more lately. Lots going on there. And Josh at paradox.ai is my email as well. So any questions, any follow-up, happy to kind of share anything that we can.
Well, thanks again.